Hello and welcome to the Pagan Portal podcast, produced by Moonbooks Publishing and presented by me, Rachel Patterson. If you prefer an audio-only version, hop on over to Spotify. If you would like early access to all of our YouTube podcasts, please consider becoming a member. And if you are on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. So today I welcome fellow writer, author, traveller from the other side of the globe to me. Welcome, Frances Billinghurst.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome. It's lovely to catch up with you again.
You're boiling hot, we're freezing cold. So if we could just merge a bit, that'd be quite useful.
That would suit me very much. Yes, we're sort of melting here at the moment, but that's summer.
It's bizarre to think that we are complete polar opposites, really, but that's how it goes. Clever stuff.
It makes life interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Well, how long have you got, really? I've been around. I've been around the tracks for a wee while. I was born in New Zealand, but I have actually lived in Australia longer than I've lived in my home country. I still call New Zealand home. But even from a young age, I guess I've been curious about the cosmos and what makes things happen in the world and how things work together, and basically those age-old questions as to why am I here and what's the meaning of life. And this, I suppose, was spearheaded because both my parents were avid readers. My mother was a librarian. One of the first set of books myself and my siblings got was a collection of mythology books from all around the world, which I think ended up in my room more than anybody else's room. And then as I sort of progressed, got older, I sort of moved into the more esoteric sciences. I joined the member of the Theosophical Society for a number of years. And when I moved to Australia in 1990, it was right at the beginning of the sort of New Age metaphysical boom. So they had a lot of people coming out from England, especially in relation to metaphysics. And I kind of basically sucked up all that knowledge before studying Celtic mythology for about 5 years and wandering around my neighbourhood one day and came across this funny little shop that was offering courses in high magic. And I went, I don't know what that is, but here's my money and I'll sign up. It's sort of like a domino effect. My Celtic studies tutor was doing a trip to the UK, so I jumped on board that to dance around stone circles, ended up in Cardiff of all places, as you do, and joined probably my second coven there. My first true witchcraft coven. The group that I joined in Adelaide was getting more into ceremonial and high magic. And fast forward 30 odd years later, I am initiated. I've been initiated twice. The first was a bit grey, but I'm initiated of the Alexandrian witchcraft tradition. I still practice ceremonial high magic, Kabbalah. I still have a big interest in metaphysics and esoteric sciences. I'm a level 1 yoga teacher, which means nothing. I don't like pretzeling myself, but I like the philosophy. I like the philosophy because that sort of underpins the Theosophical Societies of Helena Blavatsky's teachings, which has influenced the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is the ceremonial magic teaching. So everything to me is sort of blends back into the same thing. So that's a little bit about me, I guess.
That's quite a blending melt. But then I think probably most of their spiritual pathways are a bit like that, aren't they? It's all a bit pick and mix as you go through life.
And I think that the more that you sort of go down these sort of rabbit holes, you begin to realize, especially in that sort of spiritual metaphysical scene, that we might have different labels for it, but at the end of the day, it's all very similar. And that's what I find really interesting, sort of focusing more on the similarities as opposed to the contradictions, should we say.
Yeah. Now, with that, following you on social media and your books and all of the things that you do work with a lot of different deities from a lot of different pantheons. How do you find them? Do they find you?
Oh, good question. So sometimes I feel that I'm open sort of like slaver for them, for whoever is popping along, wanting to find contact in this realm without sounding so egotistical. I do have a few main ones that I've long been drawn to, in particular of the Egyptian pantheon. But again, I sort of see them, it's a little bit hard to describe because part of me is saying, there's the Dion Fortune's quote that all gods are one god and all goddesses are one goddess. And then there's the one initiator. And that, yes, means that every god and goddess are basically an aspect of the one, so to speak, which sort of flows in with the Hermetic teachings as well. But having said that, when you work with deities specifically, they do have their own energetics and especially their own sort of like energy to them, egregore, depending on how you sort of approach them. As to whether I go searching for them or they come to me, I remember earlier in the piece, I think it was back in the 90s, before I was on the verge, I was going to England that first time. I was very attracted to Artemis. I was a young single woman, sort of out there with my bow and arrow off to conquer the world, so to speak. Being a typical Aries, rushing in where angels fear to tread. And the group that I was at the time, their parting gift to me was where I would step in the role as the high priestess with the drawing down the moon, which is part of a Wiccan rite, where the moon gets sort of called down to the priestess. And the goddess who came through then wasn't Artemis, it was actually Aset or Isis who is behind me, which actually surprised me because I knew very little about Egyptian mythology at that time. I was sort of speaking if it wasn't going to be Greek or Roman, maybe it would be Celtic, because I had spent 5 years studying Celtic mythology and I was going off doing a Celtic course basically around the British Isles. But no, it was an Egyptian goddess. And I think too, she was an aspect too of, say, the Great Mother that's around us all the time. And from then on, I work both ways, to be perfectly honest. Through my writing, like when I was writing my Dark Goddess book, I felt there were some goddesses wanted to come through because they wanted their story told. And those are the goddesses that I weren't personally familiar with. So I did a lot of research to sort of get myself a bit more familiar with them. And some of them just pop along because, I don't know. And again, I'm there, I'm doing rituals. I like doing rituals. I'm sort of very devotional in my work. And I like to recite, say, the ancient hymns, or when I write my own poetry, my own invocation, I like to sort of stylize it on those ancient hymns of, the Homer or the Phaeric hymns, because I really like them. And I don't know, and they just pop along and they seem to enjoy it as well. So it's very unusual.
I think it's important to be open though, isn't it? I think that's the key, isn't it? To be open to whoever comes along, because it will be for a reason.
It is, and I think also you can just say, I've got a friend, she's very psychic, or mediumship, she just goes, hello, who's there? And that's quite interesting to be in circle when she's just going, hello, who's there? I sort of would like to sort of have a precursor as to who to expect, but we have had rites, yes, I had a subgroup of a main group at one stage, and we decided we'd do a Dark Goddess, one of my first Dark Goddess workings. And I had this deck of cards, and I'd pulled out all the Dark Goddess cards, and we laid them in, and we called them and lined them up to specific waters and elements and all that stuff. And we were sitting down into our magical working, and myself and another person got this vision of another goddess stomping through our circle, demanding why she was not included. And so we just sort of came out of it and looked at each other and said, did you feel what I felt? And it's just like, yeah, something, yeah. Someone wanted to be included. Someone got their nose out of joint, shall we say. So we quickly amended that with a special right just for her. So it's a bit of a joke afterwards. But yes, so, how I approach it is there's a seriousness and also a bit of sort of lightheartedness as well.
The gods have a sense of humour, don't they? They must have a sense of humour to deal with us humans.
And especially if someone's creating an altar there and giving them something, say, oh, I don't want to give you blood, but here, have some orange cordial. They'll be sitting there going, no, prick your finger, I want blood.
What are you talking about?
Orange cordial, what's that stuff? Yes, to deal with us, they must have a little bit of a sense of humour. I like to think that I'm a bit of a cosmic joke to them as well, so yes.
But it is all a relationship, isn't it? Between us and them is a relationship, just like any other relationship, really. So you've got to have a bit of humour in there.
Yeah, I know there are people who sort of work with the gods more sort of as archetypes. I sort of do that as well. I can understand that. But I suppose my tradition of witchcraft has always been a religious devotional one, whether it is aspects of my higher consciousness or something, I don't know. I've had too many sort of personal experiences to not believe that they aren't living and breathing.
Now you do have quite a pick and mix as well across the pantheons. Do you find they work well together, or are there some punch-ups along the way?
Well, I tend not to, if I'm doing ritual, I tend to not really mix pantheons except for on the odd occasion if it's more of a generalization, like as to say I'm doing a dark goddess or a dark god or a mother rite, and then I'll include mother or goddess aspects or whatever. But when it comes to actual sort of more working with deities, I tend to either stick to the pantheons or more often than not I will do a working on a specific deity itself. So I wouldn't necessarily, and this sort of goes against my sort of craft training where you have god and goddess. So like behind me is Yamaya. Every full moon or the first full moon of each year, I do a rite down at the local beach. I don't invoke a god for her because she's fine on her own, and the same thing with sometimes
she's a strong independent woman.
and it's just like I don't know if there's any myths. There might be myths where she is. I think she does have a partner or consort, but I'm using her, or I'm wanting to call on her as her role as the protector of the water. So it'll just be that aspect to her, and the same with some other deities. It'll largely be just for them. But if I'm doing sort of craft work, well, within craft we have our own gods and goddesses, and that's a different setup. But yeah, I sort of keep them a little bit separate because I have heard from other people that even our own understanding of deities, I mean, you've got, say, Pan, and I don't know, even Yamaya, she might not be safe from Pan. In fact, I don't think there is a goddess who really is safe from Pan.
Yeah. I'm not sure you'd want to be in a room on your own with him, whoever you are.
No.
With all due respect to Pan, obviously.
Yes, we need Pan, but we need to know Pan. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Now, I think if you're open, you do find that gods and goddesses from different pantheons come along. But yeah, I think it's just about your judgment, isn't it? And feeling respect. There's no respect for them.
Yeah, and I know these days people get a little bit sort of concerned with a lot of, say, cultural appropriation and things like that. If a deity comes to you, really you have no control over that. I've had some of my major deities. One is from a completely different pantheon that, yes, I have an interest in Hindu philosophy, more yogic teachings. I did belong to an ashram for a little while, but that was dedicated to Kali Ma. I do love using mantras to my yogic teachings and my meditations, but I'm not a Hindu at all. But I do find the Hindu deities very approachable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then the other deities, one of them, the culture no longer exists, has long, I'm talking about thousands of years. And if you're looking at Egyptian pantheons, that culture, or the original culture, doesn't exist, but the main religion these days is completely different. So
I work with Ganesha, so I absolutely understand where you're coming from. I think as long as it's respect, isn't it? Respect for the culture and the religion and how it all works.
Yes. I think that's the main thing. And they will let you know if they think you're crossing boundaries and things like that. But you're right. I think at the end of the day, it comes to respect. I mean, there are some deities, probably where I am, because I'm on Australian land and Ghana country, and it's a living tradition, though it's Hinduism is still a living tradition, but I wouldn't go out there and do a rite to invoke Aboriginal deity, because I know nothing about them, and unless I'm guided by an elder of the Ghana people or whoever's land that then I'm on. But I do sort of acknowledge them, and when I do spirits of place, and also it's quite popular in a lot of pagan circles here in Australia, where we acknowledge whose land we're on. So again, come back to that whole respect.
Okay,
thing.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Mm.
Back to respect again, really, isn't it? Yeah. So you've mentioned the dark goddess a few times, and I know you have a wonderful book, Encountering the Dark Goddess. How did that book come about?
I've always sort of had I don't know if it was teenage rebellion or angst or a hangover from my gothy days back in the 80s, 90s, but I've always had sort of a drawing to darker deities, and it could also stem to how I sort of approach my spiritual path, as in sort of like a journey to understand me, and that sort of that balance between light and dark. But a number of, even probably about 10, 15 years before I actually wrote the book, I was starting to sort of present and also run, workshops on tapping into darker aspects of deity. And the book sort of evolved out of those workshops, really, because I suppose it comes down to our mindset as to what we term as dark. And that whole concept of sort of, and we see a lot today, there's this it's duality, it's just one or the other. And that was also big in the late 90s, early 2000s as well. And I suppose part of this was saying, well, these deities, I see them as deities just because they make us uncomfortable, or they challenge us, or they live in the around below us, or they created everything out of nothing, or they destroy everything in order for creation to reoccur, doesn't necessarily mean that they are nasty or evil. It's sort of like it's a natural process of the whole realm that we are part of, birth, life, death, rebirth. And I guess from there, I also went through a life-changing event in my own life through a very serious health issue. And it was sort of almost like I talked a lot about, in particular, say, Inanna's journey or descent into the underworld to meet her Ishkragul. But it was supposed through my own health crisis, actually being Inanna and sitting in Ishkragul's presence, that sort of brought a lot of sort of what I was talking about back home to me, as to how that can actually change, and when we rise again, when we ascend like Inanna does, how powerful that can be, and also how life-changing. So, and also part of me was, we pigeonhole deities, or we tend to pigeonhole deities, and we see them today as like dark goddesses can only be like dark, nasty, woo-woo, spooky, Halloween sort of deities. And some of the ones I have in my book, like Morgan Le Fay, people go, why have you got her? And it's just like, look at her story. She had everything. She could have had Tintagel Castle, she could have had Avalon, which she could have been the high priestess. Yet she gave all that away to be what? A handmaiden to Guinevere, who treated her like nothing. And it's just like, to me, that's a lesson of when we give away our power. And doesn't matter if we're male or female or in between or none, it's these myths and stories have sort of big lessons for us where we can think about.
As pagans, as witches, we understand the concept of dark goddess, but for someone outside, it does have that scary connotation to it, doesn't it?
Yes, and I suppose it's also been very conveniently linked in, say, our shadow self, and a lot of the deities are associated with the underworld. I think when I talk about the deities, I've actually sort of broken them down to at least 9 categories that I've found by looking at their myths. And there's actually, there's the underworld and there's the funeral ones and the ones of cemeteries, but there's also the creatrixes as well, like the King Kali's a creatrix, and Tiamat's also a creative goddess. From her own body, she created the heavens and earth. Then you have the shapeshifters and the initiators, like Skathak and also Credwin. On the Morrigan also, Magru is also a shapeshifter if you look at her stories. And just because, and I said, something challenges us, to me, at least this is my way of thinking, I stop and think and then just say, oh, where is it taking me? And if we sort of go into the underworld, that's almost like a resting place. And I suppose in our modern age where we have to be on the go all the time, and it can be uncomfortable if we are forced to go within and to rest and to think and to be still. And I think that's one of the greatest lessons, especially in one of the goddesses, Nepsis, who's Isis's other half. To me, though she did actually have at one stage a huge following, just as much as Isis did, but she was gradually forgotten. But to me, she is the silent one. She takes us into that silence and basically says, be comfortable in your own skin. And that can be very uncomfortable, especially in our day and age where our devices and we have to be on call, but just to sit there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes alone with our thoughts, that is scary, very scary.
Oh, I'm rubbish at that. I am sitting there doing nothing. No, I'm not good at that at all.
It's quite funny because a number of years ago I used to do a meditation circle, and I was given a copy of single Rinpoche sort of Rest in Natural Great Peace. It's just like a short recording of some Buddhist poem that he's reciting, and he's talking about sitting, letting the mind come still like a glass of muddy water. It went for 3 minutes, and the number of people who got very agitated, how long is this going to go on for, Frances? Because I have to get home. I'm going, 3 minutes. By the time you get out the door to your car, it will be over. But it was just that whole idea of sitting still with our thoughts. And it's just like I think we, especially in our modern age, we need to let that glass of muddy water sort of settle. And a lot of it,
I need that lesson. I'm going to take that one on board.
I'll send you the recording. It's actually really interesting. And it's just like, it's like coming back to our body, coming back to our heart, coming back to that place of peace and stillness within. And I think all these dark goddesses actually sort of encourage us to do that, because instead of our gaze being external, our gaze is coming internal, looking at us. And again, we don't like looking at ourselves. We like to project and blame somebody else. But when we realize that dear, it's all our fault, it's like, it's okay. Next question.
It's a big lesson. I am working on that one. But yeah, I think we could all benefit from that, couldn't we? Taking responsibility.
Yeah, and I think more and more in this day and age, I mean, it's very hard when our role models, like our politicians or the politicians, global politicians, are very good at passing the buck. No one takes responsibility anymore. But yeah, I think it's a good tool to sort of help us through these changing times.
Yeah,
as well. But so it ties in with what people are calling shadow work, and it is sort of shadow work. But all of the stuff, people expect it to be, I've done shadow work, I'm better. I'm going,
yep. Been there, done that. It's continuous though, isn't it? Shadow work. It is ongoing.
There's an American poet, I like to quote what he says. He says, we carry the sack with us, and we spend the first 20 years shoving stuff in it. Now, all the stuff that we're refusing to acknowledge and don't want to see and ignore, now that it's not me. And then we get to the certain age where we start unpacking this sack. Now, I think I spent the first 25 years shoving that stuff in that sack. And It's amazing what's in there, because I'm quite sure they breed. And then, and the thing too, it's almost like pulling back an onion, because you sort of like, there's a layer upon a layer, or you remove something and it's just like, something else that's been suppressed right below it bubbles up to the surface, and you go, oh my God. So yes, I think shadow work is just an endless journey, but it's a journey of discovery.
Oh, absolutely.
And getting to know us, and then part and parcel, this is how I work with the dark goddesses as well. It's like, if I find any anger issues raising up, especially in this day and age, I get to a certain age and I get very angry because your hormones are out of whack. Then I'll sit with Pele, or I'll sit with Durga, or I'll sit with Satmat and going, okay. And then sometimes my mind with Satmat is going, who can I sort of annihilate with my rays of fire? Probably not a good idea.
That would be useful.
It would.
I mean, although perhaps giving rays of fire to menopausal women is possibly not a good idea.
We had our own, so it's like, no. but yeah, and then it's just like, one's like Oya, she's known for the winds, and so, she's a complete tornado, and she comes through my life, and yes. And the next minute you sort of going, what was that? And it's just, okay, pick myself off the ground. And people going, you've been working with them for 20 odd years. How does it knock you over? Because they do. They're just so unpredictable. And that's part and parcel of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people get into
one particular goddess that has changed your life quite dramatically? One specific one?
Apart from the ones that stomp through circles, I would say probably Kali, which is really interesting. I don't really know when I sort of first got really fascinated with her. Here in Adelaide, we used to have some monthly meetings with pagans in the pub, and I know that was one of the first times when I met, he was called Dividasan or Kalinath. He'd had various initiations through Tantra and other Hindu traditions, and he was talking about Kali, because Tantra is all about Kali. And I was fascinated with her then, and then she just sort of appeared. Don't know how, she was just there. She just sort of like appeared. I started buying statues. I started finding myself in Indian shops looking at statues and saris going, why am I here? So I got a statue, and and David Starson or Kalinath started having a little ashram where he would have like full moon fires, because this is associated with Kali. And then having teachings, I would go along to those and learn the mantras, and and she's always been there. And I suppose part of me too is like my interest in sort of yogic teachings and the philosophies. She's part of that. And through the tantric teachings, she's perceived differently to other sort of Hindu teachings or traditions as well, because she's seen, but like her Hecate is different within various aspects or traditions of, say, ancient Greek or Roman worship. Kali is seen as the great mother. She's called Ma. And her dance is a dance of, yes, destruction, but you need that. She's like the clearing out the dross for the new to come through. She's the one who wakens Shiva's energy. Otherwise, Shiva's just going to be sitting there meditating for the rest of his life, and nothing's going to be happening. She's really, and I think too, because she cuts through all the superficial layerings that we tend to sort of put on, like, to really come back to what is really important. And I suppose all the dark goddesses sort of do that. They get rid of the dross and remind us what is really important. In the meditation circles, we used to do mantras to her, and one of the attendees was having a problem at work with a work colleague, and they thought, oh, we'll do some Kali mantras and that will get rid of the problem. Well, it did. They got a new job. They didn't think that they were going to leave that job, but they decided that a new job came up, and so they were sort of like moved sideways, but it got rid of their problem.
Be careful what you wish for.
Especially if you've got a perceived outcome, because yes, what we wish for and what we're working with divine energy might be two completely different things.
Yeah.
But you still get the end result. Still get that problem is now resolved. And she was removed. And sometimes I said, like, I see them like the big mother, and she, I can sit there and yes, she can be terrifying, but a lot of it too, I think this is my interest in the Hindu pantheon, is that the symbolism in them, and the same with Ganesha, the symbolism in there, why he has only one tusk, why he sits a certain way, why he has a mouse as a best friend. And
so important, isn't it?
Yeah, her necklace of skulls and what they sort of all relates to, severing that ego. And when we learn to surrender, we realize that life can be a lot easier. We just let go and trust.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. It doesn't mean it's a clean sailing, but you learn to ride the waves, and they do listen. I mean, I could say, hang on, I love the lessons you're showing me, but can we sort of back off a bit? I do have to.
A little bit of a break would be good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sometimes they listen there. Sometimes they just say, no, think of the wider picture. It's just like, I'm getting seasick.
Yep, we're on a roll.
Literally, yes.
So you have another fabulous book, which is on her silver rays. I love the title of that book. It's a beautiful title. What's the backstory behind that book?
Oh, good question. Because I grew up in New Zealand and out in the country, we always saw the Milky Way. And so I've long been fascinated with the stars and the cosmos, as I mentioned right at the beginning. On the silver rays, it was just beginning to compile all my sort of notes and the ritual. I used to do full moon rituals in the local park. I still do them now down at the beach. And there's just so much information out there, and I was hearing more and more people saying, just use the new moon to manifest and the full moon for this. And I'm going, but what about everything else in between? And that's how, I suppose, again, it comes back to my own sort of magical path, where you're using that path as sort of getting to know you and to improve your own self. So moving to suburbia, where I don't get to see the Milky Way because of the light pollution, it was just sort of like incorporating all that sort of knowledge together. And I suppose I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to research, because I really sort of get bogged down into, I like a lot of the backstory as to, okay, we're talking about the cosmos, but, what about the moon? What is the moon? What does it mean to us? What does it mean when, and I'm not an astrologer, but I follow astrology, a lot of astrologers, and I'm trying to figure out me and my placement in the whole cosmos, and why is my Venus and Mars always opposite? Does that mean anything? My poor little Leo moon always gets sort of banded about, and it was through gathering all that information to understand me. I had people starting to ask me how to, show them how they could use that information to understand their own selves, and it's just like, oh, okay, start putting the stuff together. But again, it's moving through the lunar cycles more. It's like understanding our place in the greater scheme of things, the whole lunar cycle, and that sort of old age saying of as above, so below, as within, so without. The outside world reflects us. So when we sort of lean into the moon, we can do it on the wider scale with the Sabbath, with the solar cycles as well. We begin to sort of start with that ebb and flow, that surrender, to make that space to allow to bring things into our lives. And that sort of makes me laugh when people say, let's manifest at the new moon. I'm going, but if your cup's already full, how are you going to put more stuff in it? You've got to surrender and let go. You don't have to banish everything or curse everything because it's a dark moon. I'm going, oh my God, dark moons, I'm just sitting there resting, planting, scheming my next cycle, but also reflecting back as to what I've gone through as well. So yeah, it was sort of like based on my own work, and yeah.
It's important to understand all of the phases, isn't it? There does seem to be a bit of a trend at the moment of, it's full moon, let's manifest. Oh no, next month, it's another full moon, let's manifest some more. Hang on a minute.
I mean, I was always taught as that, like the full moon's like almost like the end of that cycle. It's like the culmination of everything's come together. So we wouldn't do anything. We would actually give thanks, show our gratitude.
Yeah, that's missing a lot, isn't it?
Yeah,
that is missing a lot.
And grounding, because even when I was doing the full moon rituals in the park, I'd come back and I couldn't sleep that night because I'm bouncing off the walls because no one's grounding any of their energy and they're just sending it up into the cosmos, and I'm going, oh God, and I'm picking up on it, yay. But then I also noticed, so as I've over the years do my own research, it's just like, okay, yes, it's a new moon or it's a full moon, but what astrological sign is it in? And where is the moon in my chart? And does it mean anything? It's like eclipses. It's just like people were, it's a solar eclipse or it's a lunar eclipse. It means it's going to be greater and bigger and brighter and whatever. And I'm going, but no, it's in this wrong sign and this transit's pinging off things. I just want to hide. It's just like the energies are wrong. And so there's more than just looking at the moon, because the moon, and I guess it's a sort of an analogy for us as well. The moon is not isolated. The moon affects everything around it, especially ours. And then it is also taking on energies of the other transits, the other planets in the cosmos as well. And when we start putting all the pieces together, then we can actually focus on what we want to manifest in our life, or what is going to influence, or where we should be focusing on a little bit more. And a lot of that information, I've tried to put it into the book. I said, I'm not an astrologist. I've tried to put it in a way that I've understood it. And so it uses as a guide for people to sort of enhance their, once you've done your manifesting, and take it to a next level.
Yeah, I think people forget, don't they, that there are so many differences. The full moon in June is going to be different energies to the full moon in July, and you can't blanket it, or can't you? It's just full moon, you got to do this. No, it's different each month. It's different each year. There's so many other things that come into play with it.
And I mean, we're getting it. I think this is a problem with social media being.
There's lots of problems with social media.
Yeah, I've just realised, what are you trying to say? You just have problems, full stop. You really should live in a cave. You get to that stage where you go and be a grumpy old woman. I'm going, yeah, yay. But we're seeing it here. I mean, largely because of social media and because we're so American driven. It's like we get all the folk names, and that really gets under my skin. Not only do they only relate to a certain part of America, but everybody has used them right across the board. But we have pink moons, and I'm going, but it's April. What's pink? We've just had the wolf moon. I'm going, really? Since when have we had wolves here? And this is our media. This is our television stations. And then I'm seeing memes on social media from the you shouldn't be nasty, but the Instagram witches and the TikTok witches. We probably won't have much of them anymore because of what Trump done with TikTok. But it's just like, it might be wolf moon in countries where there may have been a wolf, but where I live, there are no wolves.
Yeah,
and it's the wrong season. And
we haven't had wolves in England for a very long time. Yeah. Yes, and I think it's important to realise that, isn't it? That the names were for the countries, for the places, for the locations specific, aren't they?
They were made. They were a combination of trapper names and also certain indigenous peoples. They weren't even for the Native Americans across the board. They're only like for certain tribes. And especially for indigenous peoples, they use the whole moon cycle, not just the full moon. It was the whole moon cycle, like the whole month. and somehow I don't mind saying, hey, it's, so where are we, January, and it's, this moon. I think that's nice. But here in Australia, it's either summer moon, or it's festival moon, or it's hot moon, or it's really hot moon, or it's stinking hot moon. It's not warm or snow moon. I wish it was.
No, it doesn't make sense, does it? It has to make sense to your area, to the land that you live on, to the season, to what's happening in your area. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think that's really good. I mean, when I had a teaching common, that was when we did our sort of module on the moon, I got the people to sort of look at the 12 moons or 30 moons throughout the year and come up with a name that would reflect the land that you live in.
Where they are.
And and it was hard in some months, but November, I like jacaranda moon, because that's when the jacaranda trees are in bloom over here. And Adelaide has a lot of jacaranda trees, and it is actually, it's their lilac flowers. Or May, we've got Mother's Day in May, so call it Mother's Moon. I like that as well.
Yeah, that works, doesn't it? There's a much better way of doing it. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, yeah, and again, it sort of brings you back into connection with where you are, and also in the cosmos around you, what's happening.
Yeah, so important. Yep, we're totally on the same page with that one. We should start a movement, a moon name movement.
I've been trying, but we might have to. I don't know. Everybody seems to be leaving some platforms of social media to find new ones, and I'm going, yes,
they'll all be the same. The grass is always greener on the other side. I don't think so.
Well, at the moment, it has to be, because we've just had a bit of a heat wave, and I have no grass. It's all been burnt up.
Mine's covered in frost. So
good.
Yeah, we'll push that. Moon names. Name your own moon.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think that should be a challenge. Who can come up with the best name for even 6 moons or 3 moons that really reflect your environment, and why? That's a good thing. It's like, why?
Yes, now that's it's like anything, isn't it? Moon names, magical correspondences, correspondences for deities. Why? Why are they there? Why do you put those there? That's important, isn't it?
And I think it also gives you, and this is how my mind works, gives you a deeper understanding.
Yeah.
As to, what are you doing and why? And that's the whole point.
Absolutely.
It's like, why are we here? What are we doing? Sometimes I don't know. But it's just
I ask myself that quite a lot. Why am I doing that? Yeah.
I'm rocking in the corner. There's a few dark guys that's just going, are you finished yet? We've got work to do. And I'm going, no.
Now, you have travelled to some wonderful parts of the world. Following you on social media, you have photographs from all over, just some amazing places.
Just a few places, yes.
Do you have some favourite places that you've been to?
I just think our globe is a fascinating place. I sort of work to travel these days, but when I had I was very fortunate to go to Egypt, that just blew me away, probably because I've been trying for 30 years to get there. And where I live, I'm at the bottom of the world, so everywhere is expensive to travel. And but yeah, that blew me away. But then so did India. I went to India in 2018, and I was in ashrams up in the Himalayas, and my mother had just passed, and so I was crying into Mother Ganga, or sort of like your mother hold me sort of thing. And then I was in a temple dedicated to Shiva, and I'm crying there, and that's sort of like this big release, because in India there's this living tradition of all their deities. But yeah, that blew me all the place. I mean, even when I originally went to England and danced around stone circles, we don't have that over here. That blew me away. Seeing fairies, really seeing fairies in my logical mind going, are you on drugs or something? Going, no, I'm quite sure that's a fairy. That's not a bird and that's not a bug either. That's something that's human. And I think that's, because I've got a very logical mind. But, probably because of my interest in ancient Egypt and the deities and the temples. And that just sort of fed into a bit of a fixation developing as to why and who and how and what do they really mean, and can't wait to go back. And yes. But then I spent New Year's out. I was very fortunate going out to Uluru, to Ezra, up in the middle of the desert for a few days with some friends. And even that just was beautiful. Sort of standing in our sacred centre in my own country. Where everybody else was getting drunk anywhere else. But we were there. We're actually, I was in there playing in the dirt and the red sand. And it was just, really, really spiritual and meaningful.
So thinking about Australia, obviously you are on a completely different hemisphere to me. How does it actually affect your witchcraft practice? I mean, I'm thinking of the obvious, the Wheel of the Year, the Sabbats. How does being in Australia affect that for you?
A lot. There's been, especially in the early days, a lot of banging heads against brick walls and going, especially before a lot of the teachings is Northern Hemispheric, so centric. And, coming from a tradition, I was sort of coming up against the ones who weren't sort of bendable or, oh yes, I've been out to Australia. I didn't notice a change in the energy. And I'm going, really? I've been to England and I couldn't do any magic for 3 months. I had to join a group because I didn't know what I was doing. but okay, we've got the seasons are different. Our sun moves across the sky differently. Our north is our hottest part of the sky, or hottest part of the year. This is where our northerly winds come from.
I hadn't thought about the compass directions.
Yes. So that means I'm casting circles, and our sun goes differently. So our sun rises in the east, sets in the west, but goes via the north. So it means that our G-style is anti-clockwise, not clockwise. So when I read books that say, cast your circle clockwise, I'm going, no! I use G-style or Windows terms. So it also means that our elemental placements are different, which is interesting because where I live in, say, middle South Australia, I just changed north and south around. East is where the sun rises, and west, to me, we have a body of water, the Vincent Gulf. So those two don't change, but north of me is the equator, so it's the northerly winds, and south is Antarctica, and we get the southerly winds, so that's my south. On the eastern seaboard around Sydney or Melbourne, some of them change east and west around, because east to them, they've got the Pacific Ocean. Some people change them all around for various reasons, but this is just what I do. So I work very much with the land that I'm on. So our compass points, our directions, our moon's different. Our moon is actually, I call it an introvert moon. Our waxing and waning are actually, the horns point inwards to the full moon, as opposed to outwards in the northern hemisphere. And sometimes she lies on her back, her legs in the air, shall we say? So yes. We'll just stop there. But yes, for a time I did join an online Hermetic lodge, and that didn't last very long because they wanted me to work Northern Hemisphere, and I couldn't, because I'm so used, even from my original magical teachings, we had always worked Southern Hemisphere. I've had elders in my tradition saying, oh, it doesn't matter on the astral, and I'm going, yeah, but I'm not on the astral, I'm working on the physical plane. So, and if it doesn't matter on the astral, it doesn't matter what I'm doing here on the physical plane. But I'm glad to say that, especially within my tradition, all of that's being acknowledged and almost accepted now, that we do things a little bit differently. And then when it comes to, say, the Wheel of the Year, I mean, I even wrote a book about it. It's one of the reasons why I wrote down to the Sacred Wheel. This is not as easy as just switching things 6 months around, especially with changing climate and weather patterns and things like that. And we're finding now, especially if you're looking at more craft, Wiccan Sabbath that a lot of us sort of use, and even a lot of pagans sort of use. Our harvest festival is actually at midsummer here in South Australia. It's in December when they're actually carting the wheat. And when it comes around to Lammas or Lunasa, which is, the first harvest or the grain harvest for the Northern Hemisphere, here in the Southern Hemisphere, that's our bushfire season. So it's almost like sort of the burning of whatsoever's left over. But then come March, where I live, there's a lot of vineyards. They do harvest their grapes there. So it's just certain things do not fit in. And I think that we almost need to sort of change, because Australia's so large too. We're the same size as the US, and people forget about that. And we have lots of little microclimates. So around, say, in Darwin in the Northern Territory, they might just hang out wet and dry. And so it's almost like the push now is to look to Indigenous peoples as to how many seasons they had. I know my local Ghana people did have 4 seasons. And so that, again, that's quite nice. But when I've gone to America, I do find it really interesting that I don't know if it's because here in Australia or the Southern Hemisphere, we've had to think about things like that. But America's the same size, yet people that I know in Los Angeles are casting the circle the same way as someone in New York, and someone up in Philly is casting the same circle directions as in Florida. And I'm going, but isn't there a difference? And they don't seem to understand where I'm coming from. It's just like, oh, okay.
No, I'm with you. I think it has to be flexible. Even with climate change from the 70s, when the format we're used to was put into place. It wasn't designed in England, so it's not going to work. It was designed in the south of England. It's not even going to work in the north of England with the different climate changes and the temperatures. And I think it's a good structure, but I think it does have to be flexible to work with the area that you're in. Absolutely.
And how many people are ploughing fields and cutting down the wheat these days? Most of us are living in suburbia and going down to the supermarket. So we're really sort of disconnected. I mean, I do like the folklore and the myths that have come out of it, and I do incorporate them, but I do also like to, as I mentioned earlier, acknowledge my land and also acknowledge the changes that we're having to make. So I sort of go, in my tradition, we do, traditionally it's this time of the year, and this is, we were, what we're sort of honouring. However, on this land of the Ghana people, the sun is out in force, and we actually have I think the Aboriginal peoples have a female sun and a male moon.
Okay.
A little bit different as well, and she's chasing husband across the sky, and things like that. So just sort of like having to mould it a little bit more so it does make more sense to us as well.
Yeah. Connection again. Back to connection again.
Yeah, I think that's the underlying theme, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially walking a pagan path is, where do you fit in? And when you understand that connection, then it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You can connect in. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, definitely. So just to finish up, last question. What new adventures or projects have you got planned?
I'm having to stay put for a little while. So, yes. Well, I've been very fortunate. I mean, I was supposed to go to England last year, but my expenses sort of blew out. But it sort of has paid off in a way that I'm doing sort of live streaming courses through the College of Psychic Studies, which is really good. I've got one coming up this month, or this weekend actually, and that's Dendera. So it's one of my favourite Egyptian temples. In March, I've got a workshop, a class on creating change with the moon. So what we was discussing here, my take on how to manifest with the new moon, we're going to be looking at that, looking at your birth charts, looking at all those things that you haven't thought about as to how to make those sort of deep changes. And then in April, we're doing another course this time on my next favourite temple, which is Abydos, and the star portals and the story of the resurrection of Osiris there. And then online in my own sort of space, it was supposed to happen next month, but I've got too much on. So in March, I'm going to be starting an online sort of a deep dive into shadow work, but using sacred myths like the Inanna's Descent, Persephone's Descent, Medusa, and look at sort of intergenerational trauma, sort of like going into our shadow self and then rebirthing the new, because I think shadow work is really good when you learn to integrate it. So that's coming up in March. And later on, either end of February or March, I'm starting a sort of a show on my YouTube channel where I'm sort of chatting to magical people about doing magical stuff. So, so I think if people are interested, they go to my website, mysticalsoulacademy.com, and I've got a free newsletter there, or they can follow me on the socials. But if they sign up for that free newsletter, they get informed as to all these things, not only in person, but also online. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So quite a bit happening.
It has been really, really interesting talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's all right, Rachel. It's been lovely talking to you too.
Thank you very much for all of the listeners and viewers. Thank you for joining us as well. And join us again next time on the Pagan Portal Podcast. Thank you, everyone.
You have been listening to the Pagan Portal Podcast, a Moonbooks Publishing production. For more information, please visit our website.